Is the Scuf Envision Pro still worth it 1 year later? In this video, I'll be discussing the benefits of this controller as well as the downsides. My name is SJ the Sauce God, and I've been using this controller almost daily for the last 1 year. I mostly play Warzone and stream on Twitch, and this controller has earned its money's worth, in my view. With the release of the new Black Ops 6, the new Warzone Resurgence map, and the return of Verdansk, I thought it was time to finally do a review of this controller. Now, let's talk about the benefits of this controller. This is one of the cheapest pro controllers that Scuf produces. The Envision Pro comes in at a price of $180 USD, while the PS5 Scuf Reflex starts at a price of $200, the Reflex Pro starts at a price of $220, and the Reflex FPX starts at a price of $250. However, I will note that the Xbox Scuf Instinct does come in slightly cheaper than this controller at $170. The next pro I wanted to talk about is the functionality of this controller. The G buttons have changed the game for allowing me to deafen in Discord when I'm in the gulag, to push a talk and talk smack to people in proximity chat, and to even pause and play music from Spotify. The G buttons have allowed me to keep my hands on the controller for as long as possible while gaming. Another aspect of the functionality that I've really enjoyed with this controller is the bumper buttons on each side of the controller. I have both bumper buttons here assigned to up on the D-pad, and for those of you who are familiar with Warzone, up on the D-pad is for live pinging my enemies, and that allows me to live ping them without removing my fingers from the thumbsticks. I'm just pressing with this part of my hand. In Warzone, that's critical. A further aspect of this controller that I really enjoy is the customizability in the IQ app. The IQ app allows any mappable buttons to be assigned to an action. That action is A, B, X, Y, or any D-pad input, a trigger input, bumpers, your thumbsticks, to keybinds, to keystrokes, and much more. Additionally, the IQ app allows you to adjust dead zones for your triggers as well as your thumbsticks to help ensure that your aim is accurate and your shots are quick. I will say that I do utilize the hair triggers on this controller, which is a mouse click. In fact, all of the buttons on this controller are mouse clicks. An additional benefit, which is not unique to this controller, but still a benefit, is the ability to toggle between profiles. I know that this isn't necessarily unique to Scuf controllers, but it is a capability that I utilize on the Scuf Reflex, and I do utilize on the Envision, especially when playing other games because of the button requirements for those other games. It is nice to not have to remap the entire controller to play another game, and you can just hit a button and it's ready to go for whatever game you want to play. And finally, maybe the most superficial of benefits is the lighting capabilities of the G buttons. It just looks beautiful. This is purely an aesthetic benefit, but not a benefit that I see very much on other controllers. I've had it set to the same rainbow color scheme since I got the controller on day one, but I will say that when it's on my desk and I'm just looking at it on my desk, it does look very nice, just sitting there with the different colors gradually moving over it, and it's very customizable. Now let's talk about the downsides of this controller. The first is the requirement to use the IQ app. And while the controller does have a memory mode, to use the controller without the app open, I found that the controller will act finicky until I open the iQ app. Now, this isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but I can't tell you how many times I will load into a game and then realize that the controller is behaving in a way that it's not supposed to, and then I'm forced to pause what I'm doing, open the iQ app, and then it starts operating in the way that I expect it to. Now, for some people, being forced to use the app itself and keeping it open is going to be too much, especially when they're experiencing issues with the app itself. And I've dealt with issues with the app myself, and that's a nuisance. But those issues, for me specifically, have been pretty rare. And I haven't had very many issues with the iQ app itself in the last 10 to 11 months. And in terms of keeping the app open, I've kind of developed a process that I open the iQ app prior to even launching Call of Duty. So I always have the iQ app open on my computer and prepared for whenever I'm gaming. An additional con is the time it took me to get used to using this controller. Just for a little bit of context, I started gaming in 2020 again with the PlayStation 4 controller, and then I moved into the Scuf Impact, and then into an Xbox Elite controller, then to a Scuf Reflex Pro, then to a Scuf Reflex FPS, and now I'm using the Scuf Envision Pro. And while I've used so many controllers, none of them took as much time to get used to as this controller took. I remember the first few weeks of using this controller, I was often complaining that it felt like the triggers were cutting into my index fingers. I was regularly complaining that the controller was not comfortable for me to use. And I know that's a little bit hard to describe, but if you look here, you can see that the triggers are kind of sharp. And I remember being so annoyed with the feeling that this controller had in my hands. And it took me about 3 to 4 weeks of grinding through the pain to finally get used to using this controller. And I will say that while that was a long duration of time, I'm so glad that I stuck around and got through that period of time, because for the last 11 months or so, I have not had any issues with comfortability with this controller. An additional downside, which some might think is a downside and some may not, is the requirement to keep this plugged in. I don't necessarily view this as a downside because most pro level controllers require you to plug in, especially when playing on PC. There is the ability to utilize a wireless connection as well, but you will experience more latency. And so for the best connection, you're going to want to have this plugged in. And I certainly do keep it plugged in all the time. And the final drawback of this controller, which many of you are astutely aware of this, is the inability to overclock. I previously used an overclocked Scuf Reflex FPS, and then I swapped over to this Envision Pro, and I went from an overclocked controller to a standard controller. And I will say the difference is negligible, but I do recognize that people swear by it. And personally, I think this may be a placebo effect, because we're talking about milliseconds here. Like, this is very minuscule amount of time. But I also understand that placebos have their own positive effect. So to each their own. I swapped over to this controller. I didn't really notice all that much of a difference. It works great with the PC. It's made for the PC. So it's not really an issue for me, but it may be an issue for others. Now, would I buy this controller again? Absolutely. With 1 year of usage, this controller is still going strong. And I understand that the controller is now beyond the period of the warranty. So if something happens to it, I'll have to pay out of pocket. But for the amount of hours I have put into this controller, it's a no-brainer on purchasing this again if I needed to. That's going to be all for today's video. Thank you for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing for more content like this. And have a great day.